Elara Voss had never known a single day without whispers following her. In the Thornwood pack, she was the girl with the silver mark, a strange pale scar shaped like a crescent moon that curved across her collarbone. No one knew where it had come from. She had been born with it, and from that first night, the pack elders had decided what it meant. Cursed, unlucky, a bad omen wrapped in human skin. She grew up believing it. When the crops failed one year, people blamed her. When a litter of pups was born sickly, they blamed her again. She learned to walk with her eyes down and her voice quiet, because silence was safer than being noticed. Omegas were already at the bottom of pack life, but a cursed Omega was something lower still, something people avoided touching, as if bad luck could rub off through skin. Her father, Garrick Voss, was the beta of Thornwood, a proud man who cared more about his standing among the other packs than he ever cared about his daughter. Elara had long since stopped hoping he would defend her, so when he came to her one autumn evening with his jaw tight and his eyes refusing to meet hers, she already knew, somehow, that something terrible was about to happen. "You're going to the Blackthorn Kingdom," he said, as if he were speaking about the weather. "King Draven Ashgrave has agreed to settle my debt in exchange for you." Elara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "Settle a debt? You mean you're selling me?" He didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch. "It's already decided." There was no goodbye, no apology, only a wagon waiting outside at dawn, and two guards who treated her like cargo rather than a person. She sat with her hands folded in her lap during the long journey north, watching the trees grow taller and darker, the air growing colder the closer they came to Blackthorn territory. She had heard stories about King Draven. Some called him ruthless. Others said his beast had gone silent 10 years ago, after the death of his first mate, and that he ruled now with nothing but cold duty, no warmth left in him at all. Elara told herself it didn't matter what kind of king he was. She was already convinced her life was over the moment the debt was paid. She would simply exist in his castle, unnoticed, the way she had existed her whole life. That was the only outcome she allowed herself to imagine. The Blackthorn Castle rose out of the mountains like something carved from stone and shadow, its towers sharp against the gray sky. Elara was led through iron gates and long corridors lined with guards who did not look at her twice. She kept her head down, bracing herself for whatever judgment waited at the end of the hall. When the doors to the throne room opened, she lifted her eyes only because she could not stop herself. King Draven Ashgrave sat upon his throne like a man carved from winter itself, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked bored, distracted, the way a man looks when he is fulfilling an obligation he does not care about. Elara had expected that. What she had not expected was the sudden change that swept through the room the instant his eyes met hers. He went rigid. His hands gripped the arms of his throne so tightly the wood groaned beneath his fingers. His eyes, which had been dull only a heartbeat before, flared gold, the color of a wolf's gaze breaking through a man's control. A low sound rumbled from his chest, not quite a growl, not quite a word, but Elara swore she heard something inside it. Mine. The court erupted into murmurs. Advisors leaned toward each other, whispering urgently. An older woman near the throne, dressed in black, went pale and took a step back, as though she had witnessed something forbidden. Draven rose from his throne so fast, the movement startled even his own guards. He crossed the room in a few long strides and stopped in front of Elara, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him despite the cold stone floor beneath her feet. His eyes searched her face as if he were trying to convince himself she was real. "Say something," he said quietly, his voice rough, almost desperate. "Tell me your name." "Elara," she whispered, too stunned to do anything but answer. Something in his shoulders eased, just slightly, as if her voice alone had settled a storm inside him. "Elara," he repeated, testing the sound of it, then louder, to the room, though his eyes never left her. "She is not a servant. She is not a debt paid. She is my mate." The room went utterly silent. Elara did not understand what was happening. She had walked in prepared to be forgotten in some corner of the castle, and instead, a king was staring at her, like she was the only thing keeping him standing. She wanted to feel relief. Instead, she felt fear, because nothing good had ever come from being noticed. "You don't know me," she said, before she could stop herself. I was sold to you. That doesn't make me anything to you. Draven's jaw tightened, but there was no anger in his eyes, only something that looked almost like pain. I know, he said, but my beast knows something my mind is only beginning to understand. Give me time to prove it wasn't a mistake. She did not believe him. Kings did not chase after cursed omegas. Whatever this was, she was certain it would not last. The following weeks proved harder than Alara expected, though not for the reasons she had feared. Draven did not touch her without permission, did not demand anything from her, did not treat her as property despite the way she had arrived at his gates. Instead, he seemed to orbit her from a careful distance, appearing in hallways she happened to walk through, sending warm meals to her room, correcting anyone in the court who dared whisper the word cursed in her presence. Not everyone welcomed her. The woman in black, who Alara learned was Lady Serena, aunt to Draven's late mate, made her disdain clear at every opportunity. He mourned for 10 years, Serena said one evening, cornering Alara in a quiet corridor. And now some Omega with a witch's mark appears, and his beast forgets everything? This is not fate. This is dark magic, and you know it. Alara did not know it. She had never practiced anything close to magic in her life. But the accusation frightened her enough that she tried, twice, to leave the castle in the night, slipping toward the outer walls with nothing but a borrowed cloak and the hope that no one would notice her absence until morning. Both times, Draven found her before she reached the gates. The first time, he said nothing, simply walked beside her back to the castle, his silence heavier than any scolding could have been. The second time, his control slipped, his beast rising just enough that his eyes flashed gold in the moonlight. "Why do you keep running?" he asked, his voice strained, as though holding himself back cost him everything. "Because I don't understand why you want me," Alara said, her voice breaking, despite her effort to stay calm. "My whole life, people have looked at me and seen something to fear or something to throw away. You're a king. You could have anyone. Why would your beast choose the girl everyone else called cursed?" For a long moment, Draven only looked at her, and something in his expression softened into something achingly human. "Maybe," he said, "my beast sees what your pack refused to. Maybe this mark on your skin isn't a curse at all." Alara wanted to believe him, but belief did not come easily, to someone who had spent her whole life being told she was less than nothing. It was an old healer in the castle, a quiet woman named Merrin, who had served 3 generations of Blackthorn rulers, who finally gave Alara an answer neither of them expected. Merrin examined the crescent mark on Alara's collarbone with careful, reverent hands, murmuring to herself before finally speaking. "This is not a curse," Merrin said. "This is a bloodline marking, one I have only read about in old texts, never seen with my own eyes. The Luna Wolves, the first line of true Lunas, carried this mark centuries ago, before their bloodline was thought lost. If this is real, child, you are not cursed. You are something the world believed extinct." Alara sat frozen, trying to absorb words that reshaped everything she had ever believed about herself. If this was true, everything Thornwood had punished her for, every hardship, every unkind word, had been rooted in nothing but ignorance and fear of something they did not understand. Draven, who had been standing nearby, crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his, with a gentleness that startled her. "You were never cursed," he said. "You were only waiting for someone to see you clearly." For the first time since arriving at Blackthorn, Alara allowed herself to cry, not from sorrow, but from the strange, overwhelming relief of finally being believed. Peace, however, did not last long. Word of Alara's awakening bloodline spread beyond the castle walls faster than anyone anticipated, and it reached the ears of a rival alpha named Cale Ravenswood, a man who had spent years trying to weaken Blackthorn's influence through quiet manipulation, including engineering the very debt that had forced Garrick Voss to sell his daughter in the first place. Cale had never expected that debt to produce a Luna bloodline capable of threatening his own ambitions. He moved quickly, gathering warriors and marching toward Blackthorn territory under the excuse of an old border dispute, though everyone who understood the timing knew the truth. He wanted Alara removed before her power could be fully realized. The castle prepared for war. Draven wanted to keep Alara hidden deep within the fortress walls, safe from any danger, but Alara refused. "I have spent my whole life being hidden away because people were afraid of what I might be," she told him, standing tall, despite the fear tightening in her chest. "I will not hide now that I finally understand what I am." Draven searched her eyes for a long moment before nodding, respect replacing worry in his gaze. "Then we face this together." The battle that followed was fierce, chaos spilling across the castle grounds, as Kael's forces clashed with Blackthorn's warriors. Alara, standing at the edge of the old forest bordering the castle, felt something ancient stir inside her, a pull she had never experienced before. She pressed her palm against the bark of the nearest tree, and to her astonishment, the forest itself seemed to answer. Wolves emerged from the shadows between the trees, creatures larger and older than any pack wolf Alara had ever seen, their eyes glowing with quiet, ancient intelligence. They did not attack indiscriminately. They moved with purpose, falling into formation around Alara, as though she had commanded an army simply by existing. Kael's forces faltered at the sight, their confidence crumbling as the old wolves advanced. Draven fought at Alara's side, his beast finally freed from 10 years of restrained grief, fighting not out of vengeance, but to protect the future he had only just begun to imagine. When Kael himself finally faced Alara across the battlefield, he sneered, still clinging to disbelief. "You're nothing but an Omega playing at power you don't understand." Alara did not flinch. "I understand more than you ever gave me credit for," she said, and the ancient wolves surged forward as one, driving Kael's remaining forces into retreat. By the time the fighting ended, Kael had fled north with what remained of his warriors, his ambitions in ruins, his conspiracy exposed before Draven's entire court. In the quiet days that followed, Blackthorn began to heal. Lady Serena, having witnessed Alara's strength firsthand, offered a stiff but sincere apology, admitting she had let grief cloud her judgment. The rest of the court, once hesitant, now spoke Alara's name with something close to reverence. On the day of her coronation, Alara stood in the castle's grand hall wearing a gown the color of moonlight, the crescent mark on her collarbone visible, and for the first time in her life, unhidden. Draven stood beside her, his eyes steady and full of a warmth that had been missing from Blackthorn for a decade. Before the entire court, he took her hand. "She was never bought," he declared, his voice carrying through the hall. "She was never a debt paid, or a burden passed along. She was found, exactly when my heart needed finding her most." Alara looked out at the faces watching her, faces that had once feared her mark, now bowing their heads in respect instead. She thought of the girl who had spent her whole life believing she was unwanted, and she let that girl go, gently, the way one releases something heavy after carrying it too long. That evening, standing beside Draven on the castle balcony, the wind cool against her skin, and the ancient forest visible in the distance, Alara finally allowed herself to believe in the life unfolding before her. The silver mark on her collarbone caught the moonlight, shining rather than shameful, a symbol not of a curse, but of exactly who she had always been meant to become. Below them, the kingdom knelt, not for a debt repaid, but for their true queen.